All right, you guys, got a little bit of disappointing news here. New reporting out from Politico detailing how Elizabeth Warren has been pivoting on Medicare for All in an attempt to lock up the nod for VP with Joe Biden. Now, just one quote from the article, one example of her making the pivot. Here, while she was speaking at the University of Chicago, she said, quote, "I think right now people only want to see improvements into our healthcare system, and that means strengthening up the Affordable Care Act." Now, she did go on to clarify that she still supports Medicare for All in the long run, but that she thinks in the short and medium term, we should only be focusing on building up the Affordable Care Act and that we should put Medicare for All on the back burner for now. So this is, in my opinion, just terrible political strategy, political maneuvering on the part of Elizabeth Warren. I think this is a huge mistake. But the first point I do want to make here is that, Joe Biden right now is running around claiming that, oh, he's going to be the next FDR. He's going to make real change here. He's going to really give it to the capitalist. But think about it, guys. If Elizabeth Warren thinks the best way to get VP is to pivot to the center and back off of Medicare for All, talking about, oh, I'm only going to fight for expanding the Affordable Care Act, then guess what? Joe Biden ain't going to be the next FDR. Hate to break it to you guys. I mean, this is really, really disappointing reporting, disappointing news to see here for multiple different reasons. Now, the other thing, though, is this is bad political maneuvering from Elizabeth Warren, because this is something which is actively going to undermine Elizabeth Warren's claim, Elizabeth Warren's position when it comes to getting the VP pick, right? Like, guys, think about it. The only reason why Joe Biden is even considering Elizabeth Warren, the only reason why Elizabeth Warren is even in the runnings for VP is because it is, in the hope that maybe, possibly, sort of, kind of, she could lock up at least some of Bernie Sanders' progressive vote, right? Like, that's the hope. The hope is she could lock up progressives, and that's why they would pick her, right? Like, if the Joe Biden camp ever decides to pick Elizabeth Warren, it will be because they have decided that she is the best candidate to lock up the progressive vote. And if Elizabeth Warren is actively undermining that, saying things like, oh, well, I'm not even really going to be pushing for Medicare for All. The only thing I think we should do right now is expanding the Affordable Care Act. Medicare for All goes on the back burner. Then guess what? Elizabeth Warren's claim to be able to lock up progressives is undermined. It's a huge mistake from her. And actually, there was some interesting reporting out from the New York Times talking about how well-known Democratic pollster Stan Greenberg actually ran some polls and sort of looking at the different candidates that the Joe Biden camp is looking at when it comes to VP. Now, I've been critical of the, lists that we've seen. We've really only looking at Elizabeth Warren, Stacey Abrams, Kamala Harris, and Gretchen Whitmer. There might be a few others, but the potential names there aren't all that inspiring. But at least of those major contenders, Stan Greenberg has concluded that Elizabeth Warren is basically the best pick for Joe Biden, and was sort of arguing that to the Joe Biden camp, saying that she's basically the best person that they can pick. And part of the reason here is because, quote, supporters of Senator Bernie Sanders were, quote, dangerously not united behind Mr. Biden's candidacy. And so, again, the only reason why Elizabeth Warren would be the pick is because Bernie Sanders supporters right now are not particularly enthusiastic, are really not behind Joe Biden's candidacy. And at least according to Stan Greenberg, he's run the numbers, and apparently Elizabeth Warren is the best option among those sort of Joe Biden picks that he's looking at to lock up progressives. But again, if Elizabeth Warren right now is running around talking about how Medicare for All is going on the back burner, how all these progressive priorities are going on the back burner, how is that going to inspire progressives behind Elizabeth Warren, and by extension behind Joe Biden, if she were to be picked as VP? So it's a huge political disaster, huge political mistake on the part of Elizabeth Warren to be doing something like this. If, quite frankly, if I were advising Elizabeth Warren, honestly, if I were Elizabeth Warren, the thing I would do is I would come out and say, look, I wouldn't necessarily want to be Elizabeth Warren. But anyway, the thing that I would do is I would come out and say, look, Joe Biden, if you want to pick me as VP, fine, but understand that I'm going to be in the room the whole time pressuring you on Medicare for All. I'm going to be in the room the whole time pushing you on Medicare for All. No matter where you pick me, what cabinet position, whatever, I'm going to be pushing for these priorities as best I can the whole way through in that position. Because quite frankly, guys, that's how she would actually be able to leverage the progressive vote. Now, you might hear that and think to yourself, well, Peyton, that's a little bit naive, because then she's less likely to actually be picked as vice president. But what you need to understand, guys, is I've really come to the conclusion that courage is the #1 virtue of a politician when it comes to politics. You actually have to be willing to stand up for a certain set of values, and you can't just put your own self-interest in getting into elected office ahead of your own ideology. Because if you try to suppress your ideology and say, well, I'm going to get into power and then I'm going to be pursuing these policies, guess what happens? You never end up actually getting those things done in the first place, and people just become cynical. And I think that it's a really, really big mistake. And I hate, by the way, I also hate how politicians sometimes act like they can't actually push the Overton window. The only thing they think they can do is listen to the polls and then pivot to where the public opinion is. Guys, people actually make up their mind when it comes to politics, when it comes to policy, by listening to the arguments that politicians are actually giving, right? So people will look and be like, okay, these are the different options that politicians are laying out, and then they'll pick one and then sort of be informed and be influenced by that. And so the simple fact is, by politicians only just looking at the polls, only trying to move to the center, then guess what? They actually undermine their own ability to actually push for the policies that they believe in. That's a slight bit of a tangent there, but when it comes to Elizabeth Warren is actively making just a huge, huge, huge mistake here when it comes to this. Because again, Elizabeth Warren's only appeal here is in the possibility of maybe sort of kind of being able to lock up enough progressives to be able to kick Biden over the top. Because in terms of states, right, Elizabeth Warren, Massachusetts, like, it's not clear that Massachusetts was going to be a swing state, right? Massachusetts is almost certainly a lock for Democrats. When you look, for instance, at Stacey Abrams, why is Stacey Abrams being considered? Because she's a woman of color. The hope that she could, help, inspire African-American turnout for Joe Biden, but also because she's in the state of Georgia. And so the hope is that maybe she could be able to, have a chance of flipping it blue. Now, quite frankly, it's probably unlikely that it would be enough unless the election was going to be a landslide for Joe Biden anyway. And the polls, right now the polls actually are pretty in favor of Joe Biden, but it's unclear whether or not that'll stick. And so who knows if actually she would be able to flip it blue. But anyway, my point here is this: Elizabeth Warren, literally, like I was saying, her only appeal is the hope, is the possibility that maybe she could lock up some progressives. And if she undermines that ability, if she undermines that by running around talking about how Medicare for all is on the back burner, then guess what? Joe Biden has no reason to pick you. And if he does, then you won't actually be able to execute the thing that Joe Biden picked you for. So it's a huge, huge mistake. Now, I do also want to make sure that I'm having a little bit of nuance here. Part of the reason why, this is probably coming out is because we heard Joe Biden talking about how he's also looking for someone who is a governing partner and not merely someone who is interested in trying to, mobilize votes for office. And it is true that, like, you can't be actively antagonistic to the policies of a candidate of the president if you're going to be an effective governing partner, right? But by Elizabeth Warren coming in and saying that I'm going to be pushing you in this direction, that's not being antagonistic to what, Joe Biden might be trying to do. It would be Elizabeth Warren pressuring Joe Biden the whole way through, having a voice in the room, fighting for progressive values, while in that position. So I don't believe that Elizabeth Warren, if Elizabeth Warren were supporting Medicare for all, that it would be undermining her claim to be a governing partner for Joe Biden. So, because that's just what some people are saying, and that's kind of what the article talks about. So I do disagree with that part also. So anyway, you can let me know what you think about this down in the comment section. Is Elizabeth Warren being tactical and being smart? Is that your opinion? You can let me know down in the comment section. But if you did like this video, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.